Okay, so I'd like to get back into some of the gene keys. And today we have the 11th gene key. The city of light, the gift of idealism, and the shadow of obscurity. The fascist regime of the human ego. So the shadow, so this gene key deals a lot with idealism, our dreams, the things that stir up into us. It's not just imagining fun things, and it's when we can see ourselves inspired by something, right? When we have a passion, we have a dream, we think of, we get into this moment, and it's like, what an amazing thing that would be. And then when we think about it too much, or weeks go by and we don't act on it, it's like, why was I even into that? Or was it even real? Or we let it go, right? Or actually, there's a lot of different things that could happen. Sometimes we can, the opposite can happen. We can fill ourselves up with this idea, and it's a fantasy, and we get stuck in it, and it's not a real thing, right? Like, how do we find the line of something that is far fetched and something that's manifestable, right? So a lot of this goes into well, we have to understand that there's a feminine nature and there's a masculine nature. The feminine, there's a right side of the brain that deals in abstraction, and there's the left side of the brain that deals in logic. Masculine being the logic, and the feminine being an abstraction. And we have both. And we want to maintain a balance. What is that? The corpus. We want to maintain that balance. And so there's a repressive nature and a reactive nature. And in this case, a lot of ideas, right? And these passions and these dreams that we get, they don't come from anywhere. They actually come from the feminine. They come from the the archetypal stories that have echoed, have been a driving force of humanity. We see a lot of archetypes, right, in media, uh, stories, cinema. These are, we know these archetypes, and it should be known, pretty common today, right? For anybody who reads a lot of stories or sees a lot of, like the hero journey. That's the most common archetype that gets referenced to. The hero starts at a home. Something happens. They have to go on an adventure, and they grow, and they're stronger. They overcome obstacles. They come back to their hometown, and they're a hero, transformed. It's a form of transformation. So, and that's what we aim, right? We aim to have that adventure, that transformational adventure in our life, to become greater, to fulfill these stories. So when is it diluted, and when is it fantasy? And how do we get out of obscurity into something that we can really manifest and make real in our life? So when we're off balance, we're either in a repressive nature or a reactive nature. And in future projects, what I aim, and I like to look at the repressive nature as Luciferic, and I like to look at the reactive nature as Ahrimanic. but I'll get more into that in future videos when I get more into anthroposophy, not to be confused with anthropology. The reactive nature okay, I'm just gonna read it. The reactive nature, rooted in denial and anger, turns inner fantasy into projection field and tries to manifest it in the world. If the anger were embraced and deeper fear owned, then the archetype within us would indeed manifest into the world. But the reactive nature never allows this. The reactive nature uses the outer world to hide from what lies within. These scenarios have great idea in their minds, but they never manifest it because of the depth of their denial. They cannot let go of the inner image that they have of what they would one day become, right? So when we have this goal and we expect how the outcome, right? When we're excited to do something, we put the intentions out and we follow it and we figure it out as we go. We try to map anybody who's tried to do home improvement, or if you have to go to Home or Depot or Lowe's, we know that it's going to take multiple trips. No matter how well you plan it out, it's going to take multiple trips. And c'est la vie, right? So is life. Such is life. And life is filled with adventure, surprises, and all kinds of things. And that's the great thing about it, is that there's this improv that we have to go through in life. And we get through it, and it's so much more rewarding, right? When things has an aim and it's orchestrated and a plan and you go about doing it and it holds the space for life to make it more than what we imagined, right? Isn't that there's an aspect that we all want, and that is for life to bring more than what we can imagine. And that's the beauty about life, and we should always keep room for life to make it more than what we can expect. Thank God for that, right? Imagine if everything was only what we could imagine. So, when we want to get into the gift, right? Magical realism, the gift of idealism. The only thing needed for magic to occur is for some structure and an open mind. This is where we bring the left, logical, masculine side and our right, feminine, abstraction together, so we have a passion, a story, a goal, an inspiration from the feminine. And the logical mind says, okay, great, let's map this out and bring it into reality. If it's too much on paper, it loses its magnetism. It's too electrical, and it loses its magnetism. If it's too much abstraction, and it's all magnetic with no electricity, it doesn't have a charge either, right? Electromagnetism. That's another topic for another story, I suppose. The idea there is that our thoughts are electrical and our feelings are magnetic. And when you have them together, we can have the drive to manifest. And when it comes to the things that we want to bring into this world, we don't want to consume and just accrue things. We want to create and project our self into this world, right? Each individual is a unique person. And what it means to have potential means that each person has something this world has yet to see. And it's in you. And it's your responsibility to bring it into this world. But it's difficult because we have to make space for it. So we do this by finding our inspiration, what lights us up, what brings us alive, brings meaning to us. And we find a way to work with others and however way that can manifest. And we let life fill in and bring in momentum of how that's going to happen. There's an interesting point in the context of this book that they reference to the Garden of Eden. I've never heard this before. And I'm not going to say that this is an accurate reference of the Bible, because I think that book is perhaps the most complex book I've ever read. It's a lot easier for me to grasp and conceptualize information on this level before something like that. And what referenced here, maybe I can find it and I can read it verbatim, that is more helpful. Then, confronted by a great inner daemon, the separate self begins to dissolve into the archetype itself. Every projection or urge to identify with anything is gradually purged from your type. I think, and its reference here is that when we get into the tree of knowledge, we embrace this concept of good and evil, and that is what embraces the fall. That paradise, that Garden of Eden, is a state of being that is beyond good and evil. And so there's a story, you know what, instead of referencing the Eden in the biblical reference, I think it's more like the story of Maybe, right? Somebody has horses, and what is a Cohen? Somebody has a bunch of horses, and a horse runs out, and they lose a horse. And everybody's like, "Oh, that's so bad. That was a horse of yours." And the owner of the horse is like, "Well, maybe." And then a couple of days later, the horse comes back, and he has a whole bunch of horses now with other horses. And the horse comes back and more horses with them. And it's like, "Oh, what a great thing." And the guy's like, "Well, maybe." And then the man's son is taking care of the new horses, and one of the horse kicks him and breaks his leg. And they go, "Oh, these horses were bad, they're horrible." And the guy's like, "Maybe." But then they go, there's a war that breaks out, and they're recruiting, but they can't recruit the man's son because he has a broken leg. So it's like, "Oh, it was a blessing." And he goes, "Well, maybe." So the point of the story is that things happen. The pure light of the 11th city has nothing to do with good and evil. It represents the transcendence of duality, right? We have a right side and a left brain, right side of the brain and left side of the brain. There's no escaping that. But there is a way to transcend that. It's a unifying principle. You can see how deeply this 11th gene key is wound up with the notion of spirituality and religion. You can see also how profound the Christian myth of Eden is with the tree of knowledge of good and evil. As long as we see things in terms of good and evil, we have embraced the fall. The 11th Siddhi, point, we figure directly into the tree of life. So these are things that we wrestle with, right? And that's one of the things, again, I love about the gene keys, is that these are deep forces in our character, in our being, that emerge into our life, creating stories or spinning webs of how we think, how we feel, how things play out. And here we find ourselves in that if we're wrestling with good and evil, the left side and the right side are not harmonized, and we're either feeding our ego or stuck in a fantasy of our own making, or denying that passion within ourselves that wants to come out, that's meant to come out. And when we can trust that goal and say, you know what, this brings meaning to my life. I am about this, and we set goals and intentions on a structure on how it's going to go, right?